And every time they're rambunctious, they get hit, they get screamed at, they get told, that's not right, you don't do that, or go to your room. You're gonna shut down. You're gonna throw all these layers of armor.
We went from this place where psychedelics are the devil, they're bad, they have no use at all, to everyone can do them.
I wonder how many people in the West have never walked through their house naked other than in their own bedroom.
I was crying all of the time, like overwhelmed all of the time. And I would just be like looking at my husband and I'm like, I don't know what to do right now. Like,
taken out of the womb by a medical doctor, wearing a mask, patted, shook, weighed, pricked. Like, we forget how much babies, humans in the West, are messed with in the first hour of their life.
My mind's blown right now because I didn't even realize this until you just said that. Hello, everybody. You're watching or listening to Chatting with Candace. I'm your host, Candace Horback. We're going to start this episode with some Buy Me a Coffee shout outs. If you want your shout out or if you just want to donate to the podcast, you can go to chattingwithcandace.com and click that link that says Buy Me a Coffee. It all goes back into the podcast. And as you have seen recently, we've been doing a lot more in person, which is really exciting. And I couldn't do it without all of you. So thank you very much. I want to say thank you to Rick, to Jane S., and to Stardust. Thank you so much for the cups of coffee. I appreciate the generosity. This week's episode is amazing. It is one of my favorites that I have done. I love anything when it comes to more of like the healing energy space. And before you have any assumptions as to like where this is going to go or is this so woo, this woman is the absolute real deal. I wish I found her sooner. Her work is amazing. She has so many free resources available online. I'll make sure that everything is linked below. Definitely check her out. This episode is for everybody. If you think it's not for you, give it a chance. I give it a 10 out of 10, and I cannot wait to have her back on. She was just absolutely incredible. So without further ado, please help me welcome Irene Lyon. Irene, welcome to the podcast. I have been so looking forward to this since our paths crossed digitally. I was like, I kind of wish I found you sooner in my journey, but I'm just trusting that I found you when I was supposed to.
Agreed. I actually think it was, gonna shout out to Michael Malice. It was a clip that was from your channel, and the guy that's not the expert, he nailed it with something he was talking about. I'm like, he is right about that thing. I think it had to do with early trauma and emotional verbal abuse. And I think that's where I commented on one of your posts. I'm like, good job, friend. Like, you got it right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think we were discussing like the differences when it came to aggression between men and women. Right. And I think so oftentimes everyone looks at men and the physicality and they say that is what aggression is. And they don't recognize that there's other expressions of that. So yes. Oftentimes what is really aggressive behavior from women is often overlooked, and they don't realize the severe impact that it can have, especially during formative years of child rearing.
Oh yeah. Aggression is, I would say healthy aggression, if I really stipulate the context, is one of the most misunderstood. It's not more than an emotion. It's a survival strategy, and it's essential for our health. And it's getting better. 10 years ago, we never would have considered the topic of healthy aggression and why that's possible, but we can dive into that way more as we get into some things. But yeah, super important.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to kind of distinguish the difference between healthy and maybe toxic or unhealthy aggression. And I watched one of your lives I joined. It was on parenting, and I was so excited for that. And it was so valuable. I got a lot out of that. And I was like, if I have any more children, like how much differently I'm going to be able to mother than before I had a lot of that information. Yeah. And one of the things that you mentioned in an example was biting. And I know so many moms that were like, my kid bites, I don't know what to do. And my oldest went through a hitting phase. Yeah. And before I was watching your class, my youngest hadn't really gone through anything yet. And I had some friends that were asking, they're like, what do you do when he bites? I was like, he's not biting yet. That night he started biting. And I was okay, what do I do? And I felt really lost because there's no punishing because they're so young. And then I watch your course and you're like, we can redirect this and give him something. So I found this squishy ball and I handed it. It's like, do you want to bite something? And he got so excited and
Yes.
lit up. And then he started walking around the house with this squishy ball in his mouth. And it was just, I was like, of course.
Yeah.
Of course. And just like that tiny little reframe made such a difference. And there was no need to punish or shame him or say you're bad or stop the behavior. It's like, oh, you need to do this thing for whatever reason. Here's a healthy way to do it.
100%. How old is he, may I ask?
2.
Okay. So yeah, you said you wish you had this information when you had your kids, but you do, because that's still primary years for wiring up what we would call their regulated nervous system. So you're actually way ahead of the curve, Candace, just giving you props for that. And I say that because we have students who have adult children, right? And we talked about this in that class, and you can still influence your adult children when you are in your 60s and not parenting per se. But I mean, I sense you believe in the quantum field and how things all reverb and connect through the ether. And when a parent, a mother, a father shifts themselves, even if they're not living in the same house as their adult child, it's felt. Mm-hmm. And of course, granted, the adult child has some receptivity to that. But we have seen so many cool examples of adult children shifting when their parents do the work without even telling their kids that they're doing the work.
Wow.
So to go back to the aggression thing, it's, the wrong thing. And I'm at a point now in my career where I'm comfortable saying right and wrong. It's like there's gravity. We know that, right? So this is a weird thing in the somatic nervous system healing trauma world, is there's this fear of just putting a foot down and stamping something, then saying, oh, this is how it should be, or this is not how it should be. And we know, spanking is not acceptable. It is physical abuse, for example, right? Those sorts of things. But aggression, if I go way back to the baby, when that baby is at an age to start feeling their strength, and they can, pull the hair, scratch, bite. Of course, this is true with breastfeeding. They'll do that. That's showing them, or they're feeling. It's not something they're thinking cognitively. They're feeling their interoceptive, visceral strength. Like, what? I've got these limbs, and I have these hands, and I can exert force, and I can reach, and I can grab, and I can take. And that's revolutionary for a new human. And what we want to not do, we don't want to see that force. And to quote one of my mentors, Peter Levine, look at them as a little monster, that they're trying to hurt us. Now, the trouble is when we have not done our own healing and work, and we still have our attachment wounds, it's actually quite valid for that mother. Typically it's the mother, but it can be the father, or it can be the nanny or whatever, to think that that baby is trying to hurt them and harm them deliberately. And it's not the case. They're just feeling their sympathetic energy, their fight energy, their life force. And so, true story, I was with a friend, this was ages ago because her kid is like close to 10 now, and he was hitting or biting, I can't remember what it was. And so before she talked to me, she looked up onto Google, what should I do if my baby's hitting or biting? And Google spat back, hit or bite back. And she had the intuitive nature to go, yeah, I'm not doing that. So she asked me, and I said, well, the next time I think it was hitting. The next time he hits, and he was still an infant, play with him, just like you did with your toddler. Give him your hand and acknowledge his strength and talk like, hey, buddy, like, you got some strength in there. Let's play. And that brings in the social engagement, which is part of our nervous system wiring. That's part of our vagus nerve. That's part of our parasympathetic nervous system. That key piece that they need to be met and attuned to in their energy. And if you get matched when someone when you're energetic and they match you, you feel met, you feel heard, and you are accepted into the tribe, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
What often occurs and has occurred, and no doubt still occurs, is that that energy comes and there's, a smack or stop that, or, people will shake their babies, people will hit their babies, they'll put them in their crib and be like, you need to be alone because you just hurt mommy. But that shows how disconnected humans are from this. I mean, all you need to go is to wild videos of the wild where mothers and little ones, cubs and pups are playing and fighting, and she's not being mean, she's protecting them, but also boundary, like, this is not for you, this is for me. So that's a little more advanced, but generally speaking, our comfort with our healthy aggression, that's how far back it goes. Most of us, I'm just going to be general, in the Western world, don't get that. So then what happens is we just continue to live in this world of not accepting our force. Mm-hmm. I'm a kid of the Star Wars era, so that force, that good force. And then if we have a parent that punishes us when we're infants for that, then chances are it's just going to keep happening. And then you get to your midlife and you have a chronic illness, and you don't know why. You think it's medical, but really what we're seeing with the new traumatology is so many of these chronic illnesses, excuse me, are rooted in this suppression of life force energy. And the system has no flow to it. And so part of the healing and the helping and the trauma healing is to get back to that healthy aggression. But it's not enough to give someone a baseball bat and say, okay, just get your aggression out.
So those, what are they called? Those break rooms, or they were really popular for a minute, where you go in with goggles and you smash everything. Yeah. Those are not effective.
I mean, it'll give you an aerobic workout.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think, I come from a background of exercise physiology, deep science at the master's level. And yeah, we need to move. And I think this is what's interesting is typically we are too sedentary in the West. So yeah, it's going to feel good to move and punch and squat and get the lymph going and get the heart going, and you will feel better afterwards. But it's endorphins, it's extra oxygen, it's getting waste products out. So that is good. Mm-hmm. But it sure as hell is not going to work on the deep, deep wounds. Now, there's one caveat, because I don't like to be non-contextual. Let's say someone has done 2 to 3 years, and this is how long it can take for some of my students that have had severe trauma, emotional neglect, all this sort of stuff, and they have dysregulation. It can take them 2 to 3 years to even feel comfortable, Candace. I'm going to do a face, so if those are only listening, they won't see this, to do this. So I just bared my teeth to you, and I like a growl. When someone has had such repressed physiology in their fight flight due to whatever, parenting, abuse, etc., just even seeing that or thinking about that can be terrifying.
Wow. Because
if they think about this, if your little one, and I know you're not going to do this, but if your little one or someone's little one is showing their exuberance, and every time they're rambunctious, they get hit, they get screamed at, they get told that's not right, you don't do that, or go to your room, you're gonna shut down. You're gonna throw all these layers of armor and protection around you to stay safe in this family system. And then you don't know any other way. That's just the way. Mm-hmm. And then you get introduced to this work, and this crazy lady, Irene Lyon, is saying to get into your healthy aggression. And that's like being at 0 and being asked to go to 100, like in a day. Mm-hmm. It's like saying to someone, oh, you've never ever walked 5 kilometers? Great, let's get you up to the top of Everest tomorrow. Mm-hmm. So to be able to express healthy, aggressive movement, behavior, physiology, the neurochemistry of it, you need to build up to get there. So if someone has gotten there, to go back to my point of the room where people are screaming and doing all the things, if someone has gotten there and they know how to hold their own They know how to stay connected to self, to the environment, not dissociate, disconnect. They know how to mind their space and be aware of others. They could probably have a great time. I wouldn't put that person in there with a bunch of people who haven't walked those 5 kilometers, to use that Everest example. Mm-hmm. But if you were to take a bunch of my students who are more senior in that, they'd probably have a great time, right? And this is where the whole world, I think, of retreat spaces and workshops where you have no level playing field is actually, I know it's dangerous because I hear the stories of what occurs in a lot of these big retreats where there's a lot of catharsis. And in the name of like, really, people want to heal. Like no one's going in there maliciously trying to hurt people. But when you have a room of 100 or 50 or even 20 people all doing intense, say, breath work and screaming and chanting, I can guarantee you half of those people are going to be disconnected and not really in it. But they're staying because we've been taught, stay with the tribe. Don't break the rules. You got to look good. You got to stay here. And what will inevitably happen, again, I know this from my work, is a person will either shut down more into their collapse and what we would call part of the freeze response, but it's really shut down, but they're functional. So they're packaging their desire to run and get out of that room, but they're staying. Or what can often happen is they flip into more what we would call activation. And this is where you might have someone have a panic attack. Or you might have someone, I mean, I've talked to people who have been in these sorts of retreats and they've come out with psychosis and they can't sleep for months and months because they've just gotten so jacked up and they want to fight, they want to flee, but they don't know what to do with it. But their system, for whatever reason, doesn't know how to shut down. So they stay on that high. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. Have you heard of I don't know the name of this condition. I think it's unique to psychedelics. And one of these people were recently on Lex Friedman. He suffers from this affliction. He had done a regular dose of psilocybin. I think it was about 2.5 grams and basically never got out of the trip. So now he says he'll experience basically hallucinations and just regular day-to-day life. Like I think he saw snow falling while they were there. And I find that so fascinating that something that is that reality shifting, that we're not talking about that as a possible consequence, because it seems like we went from this place where psychedelics are the devil, they're bad, they have no use at all, to everyone can do them and they don't need to be facilitated or necessarily ushered in with a shaman or facilitator. And it's like we need to find a happy medium, because I don't think either of those things are true. I don't think you can do them unsupervised with no intention and any dose is fine for anybody. I don't think that's the case. And I also don't think that they're evil and have no use. I think that you have to respect them and they're very powerful tools. And if you're not doing it the right way, absolutely damage can be done. But we don't want to talk about it because I think if there's any criticism against psychedelics, we're scared that the new legislations and regulations won't get passed. Yeah,
there's a lot there. So it's earth medicine. If we leave, LSD out of it and the more chemically induced hallucinogenics, but psilocybin, ayahuasca, there's so many, right? Even cannabis, tobacco, these are all plant altering substances. And there's so much here. So I'm going to say something that my husband said a while ago. He's also in my work and does what I do. He has more shamanistic, energetic roots. He's a musician, a sound healer, but also in this work. And he said, well, the thing with these medicines is that they're from the earth, which is great. And people in the past have used them, which is great. We are not from the earth in the way we used to be. So if you consider, and I don't mean just in the last 100 years, I mean like tens of thousands of years, domestication of plants and animals, the Industrial Revolution, the tech revolution, the medicalization of birth, the disconnection of mother from baby, and then everything else that we would consider the rat race, and what we just started talking about at the top of this show, healthy aggression.
Mm-hmm.
I actually had the funniest thought today, so I'm going to share it. I always like to start my morning with some kind of movement. Maybe I'll go for a walk. I'll walk on a treadmill that I have here, and I went into our cold plunge that has been broken forever, and I was so excited. And I don't use a cold plunge like a lot of people do. It's like just a little bit to feel, and then I get out, and it's for therapeutic. I don't like set a timer, and no one's home. My husband's away, and I walk out, and I have a towel to dry myself off, and I'm walking around the house with my towel on as I'm like turning on the kettle to make some tea. And I'm walking up the stairs, like holding all this stuff, and I'm like trying to keep the towel around me. I'm like, Jesus Christ, Irene, no one's here. Why are you keeping this towel on you? And I walk around my house naked all the time, obviously, with just my husband. But it just showed how conditioned we are. It's like I was in a locker room. And I mean, I'm fine being naked in a woman's locker room. So it was just like, isn't that interesting? And then I had the thought, this is where my mind goes, I wonder how many people in the West have never walked through their house naked other than in their own bedroom.
Probably a lot.
Probably a lot. Just like there's a lot of couples who still won't take a poop or pee in front of their partner, you know? And it's just so funny, but it's that this actually, believe it or not, connects to the nervous system because they're biological impulses and needs. And again, another, we live near a lot of cows, and I always admire cows, how they just stand there and they just let everything out, you know, and they just look at you as they're peeing and pooping. And I mean, I was brought up by 2 veterinarians, so I'm very used to this kind of stuff. I share that because so many people are frigid and not comfortable with their biology in these simplistic terms. So you throw them in, even if it's supervised and it's just you and someone you trust, and this little gram of psilocybin opens up something you've never felt before, and you've never even considered how your digestion works or how your heart rate works, and you don't know how your heart rate is governed by a part of your vagus nerve, all these things. You can, as you just mentioned with gentlemen, you can go off on a journey that is terrifying because you're not able to digest and integrate what is coming at you at light speed. Mm-hmm. Because not only are we processing the stuff from this lifetime, our in utero life, our transgenerational life from our parents, and I believe in past lives, intergalactic life. So all these lives that one might say our soul keeps, that is a lot of energy to pack in one little sit. And so I am not against these medicines, but man, they deserve, I believe, way more respect than what they're getting. And I actually fear a little bit if it becomes fully legal, and I might get, slapped for saying that. But I've seen what had occurred here in British Columbia, that's where I am, or in Canada, when marijuana was legalized. And I grew up smoking pot, as most teenagers and 20-year-olds do. I do not anymore. I can't touch the stuff. But when that got legalized, the people here weren't ready for that. And so now it's a crutch. Everyone is wake and baking. I mean, I'm generalizing, but you smell it down the street when there's kids and it's in the park and people are going to school stoned. And I'm like, is this really helping? Whereas if you go into, not so much now, but I spent a bit of time in the Netherlands in the 90s, it was just so, people were responsible with marijuana usage and psilocybin. It wasn't this cool thing. It's what you did more therapeutically or to relax with friends. Mm-hmm. So someone might say, well, Irene, if this stuff gets approved, then we can help all these people with plant medicine. I'm like, I get that, but you're missing the part that comes before, which is building foundations so that when that occurs, that person knows what to do. Because you can have a nurse there, a shaman, a medical doctor, and they can contain you and try to help you calm down if you're having a bad trip. But if you don't know how to manage your internal physiology and what you're sensing introspectively and what you're seeing in your mind, they can't control that unless, of course, they sedate you with a pharmaceutical sedative. but that'll still push that stuff into your system, the visions, the sensations. So I think there's a time and a place. I did an interview with a student quite a few years ago, where he was in psychosis after his ayahuasca ceremony, and there's a lot to the story. The shamans were not responsible. And it was really sad to see how many people had negative comments. Like, there's a lot of positive comments and people had positive, similar experiences, but a lot of the comments, Candace, were like, oh, well, he was clearly needing this experience. I'm like, no, nobody needs to go into a psychotic break. And so, there's this worry that I have that it's becoming very en vogue. It's being talked about by high-level people. Gabor Mate talks about it all the time. And I know I have colleagues that are trained in it, and that's fine, but they also understand the need to build foundation and not be reckless with it. I've gone off a little bit of a tangent. I hope I'm making sense.
No, you absolutely are. I guess ayahuasca's always been, I've never done it. It just seems really, really intense. And the thing that I find really interesting about that is the origin of it. It used to be only the shamans that were allowed to drink. And then they would tell their visions to the tribe.
Interesting.
And I guess the story is that they felt that culture and society was in such a decline that they had to open it up to everybody. So now everyone can drink because it was supposed to bring this enlightenment.
Interesting.
And then what I see happening is what you're saying. It's very fashionable to do right now. And then you have people that are going 2-3 times a year. And I'm like, if something was actually healing, not just containing, you wouldn't need to keep going back. So I wonder, in your opinion, is this because the nervous system isn't integrated? So this thing is kind of a Band-Aid on a really big hole, and it just it'll hold it for a little bit, but that pressure is inevitable and it's going to burst out of the seams.
You nailed it. I think we saw the same thing with meditation. So I'm more experienced in a little bit of that history. So thanks for that history. I didn't know that. Makes sense. It makes total sense. But in meditation, it was something back in the day of the monks and the monasteries. You did not get to learn how to meditate until 10, 20 years into your time at the monastery. The rest of your time was in service, cleaning, cooking, tending the grounds, being of service to the community, very monastic life. Once you perfected that ability to just show up every day, it's like, what is it? Chop wood, carry water. Then you got the privilege of being taught the meditation skills. And as one of my mentors, Chris Durkees, says, I've done many talks with him, he says, consciousness is a technology. It's not to be messed with. And so what occurred with meditation, it also occurred with yoga. We saw how it got botched into the West, It's a technology. Consciousness is a technology that we want to definitely improve, enhance, refine, master. But our consciousness, wherever that is, we really don't know. Let's say our higher brain and our mind, again, where is that? We don't really know. But this higher brain, let's just say the prefrontal cortex, it is driven. Our brain, in my work, is technically called the end organ. So while, yes, if you don't have your brain, you can't live. If you have brain injury, it's a problem. It is still being influenced by the autonomic nervous system physiology. And when we're trying to work with this brain level first without having proper regulation at the peripheral nervous system level, which is the autonomic nervous system level, it's like you're trying to dust and paint the house when it's on fucking fire. Pardon my French, right?
No,
it's like, why would you do that? Why would you try to dust and paint your house if it is on fire and you need to put the fire out? And so what I've seen is this, it's like we just keep doing the same thing. We're like, okay, here's a cool thing that is from ancient ways, right? Meditation, plant medicines, yoga. Let's do that because the East, they got it together, or the people connected to nature, the tribal people, the shamans, They have it together. We don't have it together in the West. So we better go take those things and use them. Now, I think it's good that we use and share and coexist with these things. But what we're missing is this fundamental self-regulatory capacity of the nervous system, which in those cultures tend to be, and it's changing more with industry and tech. But if you go into the forests, the jungles, the nomadic tribes, they are with their babies. They're sleeping with their babies. They're not punishing their babies when their babies punch and hit. They're feeding babies breast milk. They're not giving them all the crap that we tend to give them. I know you won't do that with your kids, but most people do. They're not getting screens. They're not being put in chairs at a school. They play, they connect, they have all diverse family members around them. They're with animals. They're walking barefoot. They're climbing things. They're not in jolly jumpers. They're not in cribs. They're not being taken out of the womb by a medical doctor wearing a mask, patted, shook, weighed, pricked. Like, we forget how much babies, humans in the West, are messed with in the first hour of their life, right? And so that is why I think we're craving that. One of my teachers, Steve Hoskinson, shout out to him, in the SE world, we were talking about psychedelics that came out in like the 60s, 70s, specifically LSD. And his theory is that aligns with when birth started to become medicalized. So the kids of the post-war 50s, they're now in the 70s, they're in their 20s, late teens. They're like the first generation that didn't get that yummy experience of being birthed and being held in that bliss that they would feel coming out. Instead, we're going to medicalize birth. We're going to put them in these little glass containers, 2 doors down, without mother, wrapped in blankets that they don't need, and breathing stale air and staring at artificial light. Like, even a healthy baby was subjected to that in the 50s and 40s and 60s. And so his thought was the push for people to want to be free love and let's drop acid. It was that, and this is just his theory, not mine, I'm just sharing it. It was their desire to feel that deep connection with source that they never got, which they should have got with the mom. And I just got shivers through my whole body saying that. And I sense, Candace, that we're still chasing that. And so meditation, if not done well, can bliss us out into shutdown. It's called spiritual bypass. I actually call it somatic bypass, because you're bypassing your somatic physiology because it's too much to feel all the pain and dysregulation. So I'm just going to sit and numb out what I'm feeling. And then with the plant medicines, I honestly think it's just another attempt to try to find that connection. And I don't know, I don't know what's going to happen with that, because there's some very big heavy hitters that are putting and pushing out that for the treatment of depression, for the treatment of PTSD with our veteran population. I get it. But I also see how long and delicate the process is when I have worked with people with complex PTSD from war, from abusive relationships, parenting situations. It ain't a quick fix. And even if you do offer that little push, that little stimulus, you need so much aftercare to ensure that stays and integrates. And I know how this system works. I don't think that there is the infrastructure to keep those people in a safe, secure retreat center for a year after their experience. Probably not. I mean, that would be the best way to do it, but they're probably just going back into their lives. Maybe back to a relationship that doesn't quite get why they did that. And anyway, I could rattle on and on about that.
No, yeah, it is a really tricky spot, especially if you're considering the vet community or people that are suicidal, like they're suffering from like a very deep depression, because according to like the MAPS research, it's you do 1 to 3 high doses of MDMA and they're saying it knocks the depression or the complex PTSD out. So that's obviously better than the alternative. But it's like, what does that integration look like for people that maybe it isn't a longer or more permanent fix? So are you offering like a full body integration or somatic integration and really regulating your nervous system?
So I want to offer one piece of context, because I have no doubt that there will be some that they'll have that dosage that you just mentioned, and they really have healed a lot. But we have to look at their previous history. So I don't know the stat, but one of our teachers said this, and this is for US stats, but a very high percentage of people that sign up for, say, the Marines or the military come from a highly abusive childhood. And the reason why that occurs, not the abusive childhood, but going to the military, is their whole life has not had any certainty. There's been no order, there's been no control, and they're seeking it. And there is a family that wants them. They'll be given 3 square meals a day, an education, and they're being told what to do, when to get up, when to shower, when to work out, when to be deployed. And it really is the family. And so I get it. Then there's some people that go into military not because of that. And so if we've had a stronger first 3, 4, 5 years of our life, we're going to have more, we call it real window of tolerance. It's a term coined by Dan Siegel, basically good nervous system regulation. So if you take one person who had good nervous system regulation in those first 5 years of life, they were wanted, loved, good boundaries, you throw them in a war zone, they might get PTSD, but they will be able to heal from it a lot faster because their base is stronger. So that person might have some form of PTSD from an IED explosion, from feeling trapped because they were trapped or something like that, or just whatever it might be, seeing things, horror. But you give them that dose and it actually helps recalibrate things. It pops them out of that intense situation physiologically, neurologically, and it could reset them. I don't use that term lightly. I rarely use the term reset when it comes to the nervous system. Whereas someone who goes into that war zone or even is just in a command room seeing stuff, that can be just as traumatic as being actually out there moving and fighting. And if they come from a background without the good attachment, without the good security, without the good regulation, they are more likely to end up with complex PTSD, which then comes with pain, depression, chronic illness, bowel problems, immune system problems, insomnia, all that stuff, versus sort of what we would call more standard PTSD, where there's just a little bit of triggering that occurs when you hear something, smell something, remember something. So I think that it's really hard to know the accuracy of some of this stuff without looking at the history. And then, Candace, what's happening to that person 2, 3, 4, 5 years later? Are they really fully regulated, or did that just help give them a little boost to get going, but then they popped back into management strategies to cope? Right? Yeah.
That's fair. Yeah, that's really fair. So if you have, like, you're trying to set yourself up or your child for having a regulated nervous system, and let's say you had a traumatic pregnancy or a traumatic birth or highly medicalized, which you could definitely say is traumatic as well, circumcision. I get berated for this, but for me, like, that's the first time a baby is really dissociated from their body, right? Like, you have no anesthesia, nothing to numb the pain, and you just literally are cutting off flesh for no reason, reason. But we pretend that there is, and that's okay. So you have all these things. So even a parent that's like, I'm doing all the right things, like, if you had any of these things, you need to consider them. How would you help to regulate your child's nervous system at a young age? Because obviously you can't give them a course or anything because they're so young. It's like, what do you do in your day-to-day practices to try to regulate that nervous system?
You start with yourself.
Okay.
it depends on the severity of the trauma. So, and there's so many examples, but if a kiddo really was, let's see, what's an example I could use that's actually quite common. Let's say they had a surgery that was life-giving, like they had to have spinal surgery or something like that because of a ganglion or a tumor or whatever. So that little one is definitely going to have some surgical trauma from the anesthesia, from all of it, not understanding cognitively what is going on. That is where having some consultation with someone trained in the areas I am, namely somatic experiencing, somatic practice, which is the work of Kathy Kane and Steve Terrell, and Peter Levine's higher level work, which he calls the eye of the needle, which is working with surgical, anesthesia, and near-death experience states. They all kind of clump together. It's hard to find someone with all those specialties. We do exist. Let's just say you can't find that, because I'm going to say it's possible a person won't. That is where you, the parent, and this is why I created the courses I've created, you can do a lot of the healing with your kid, not because you're trying to treat them, but through your own regulation. So let's just say, paint the scenario. Let's say a person's gone through some of my work. They know how to connect to their viscera. They know how to, we would call it drop, but it's to help regulate and calm the kidneys and adrenals. They understand attunement, orienting, resourcing, how to slow their breath down, but not in a way that's dissociative, and just be in their bodies with the earth, with their baby. You can hold that baby and have the intention of their kidneys, adrenals, their gut, their brain stem. Let's say their spine was worked on. You know, you can put your hand on their spine. I teach in my courses how to work with the layers of the body, the skin, the fascia, the bone, the muscle, the marrow, and have that mother or father hold and just have the intention of those little areas, not so much healing, it's safety. Mm-hmm. It's like, and also acknowledging, oh my goodness, that must have been so scary. So scary. Don't say you were scared, because this is one thing that I think is a misnomer, is a lot of mothers and fathers get confused when I say you shouldn't show your children emotion. They're like, what? How will they learn it? The thing is if they see mom or dad freaking out and really emotional and they're really young, and by young, I mean under the age of 14, they think that they have to take care of you. So they'll change themselves to soothe you. So that's where it's like, you're good, mommy's here. We're just going to talk to your muscles. We're going to talk to that bone that had to get drilled in. And, oh, that must have been so hard. And just feel my hand, and it's safe. And the tissues hold memory. So if, let's say, there was something that had to pierce the spine or whatever for fluid to be tested, like, you can talk to that area, right? You can use touch that lets them know, I'm here. Oh, that must have been so scary, being in that operating room with people with masks on and funny lights. And we're going to sit in this space with dim lights, containment, and just hold you. And so for that example, that is one way to do a lot of healing with, say, infants. Toddlers, it's a little different because they have more energy, but that's where play. And you did that with what you said with your little one. Like, kids will know what to do when you allow them to move out of it. My husband worked with a little one who had to have brain surgery as a baby. Oof. And it's such a great story because it had to happen. Because of that story, she definitely had delays developmentally, sensitivities. The thing that was difficult is the parents really didn't understand. Even though Seth did all this work with him, the mother was a bit more understanding, but the father I just want to go to a baseball game with my daughter. I'm like, dude, she can't do that. And so he would do all this work with this kid. Like, kid was about 8 or 9 at this time. And then all the work would just be thrown out of the window because he had that projection of this is what it is to be a dad. I want to go to a baseball game with my kid. And she just would blow up because it was too much. But one of the things that they worked on, Candace, is it was in an office setting, my old office, and we have a skeleton that hangs in the corner because of my Feldenkrais work. And she loved skeleton. She called it Mr. Skeleton. And so he got it down and put it on the floor. And we had markers and pens and matches. And what did she want to do? She wanted to burn Mr. Skeleton's eyes out. And the mother was like, oh, and Seth's like, let her do it. It's fine. And what that was, it was her aggression, her sadistic energy coming out because she had been cut open in her brain.
Ooh.
So even though she was a baby, this is where when people say it's in the body, it's like, this is what this means. It isn't just in this emotional movement of catharsis. It is that deep. And so he would let her, he would strike the matches, and it was safe. And she'd like, let's burn Skeleton's eyes out. And they did that for a while. There was also some times where she had red markers and she would just red all over Skeleton. But then the turning point came, and this was over months and months and months and months, where one day she came in and she wanted to clean Skeleton. She wanted to bandage Skeleton up. She wanted to pat it nicely. So that was her transitioning from, I don't need to get this sadistic energy out. I now want to help. So you see, if a kid was at home with their parents and the kid says, Mommy, I want to take this thing and destroy it or set it on fire, or I want to, my mom just brought all my Barbies over, Candace. I couldn't believe she kept them. Oh my God. But if a kid wants to pull a Barbie's leg off, let them do it. Stay with them, have them experience it. Of course, at that age, they're not going to go and pull a human's leg off. It's their version of play therapy. So your question was, what can a parent do when they know these things have happened? That is more extreme, but don't underestimate the amount of interventions that our kids have gone through that we think as normal. Dentist, having a broken arm and having it to get cast, getting an x-ray, vaccines, all these things, anything where you're holding a kid down and they're trying to fight, that is going to still be in their system. And then if you don't understand how the physiology works, 2 days later, you could be at home and you're like, why does little Johnny keep fighting with his sister? He wasn't doing that. But if you can make those connections, teeth cleaning, we had to hold him down. And the dentist was a little abrupt. That's him wanting to punch the dentist in the face, not his sister. And so that's where the parent has to understand what we would call stored traumatic procedural memory. Basically, a procedural memory is anything, it's a procedure where we want to get something out, but we can't. The easiest example, if you're walking down a soccer pitch and a ball comes to your head and you see it and you do this, right, to protect. Or a knife falls when you're cutting vegetables and you pull back. Now imagine, Candace, if you had your toddler at your legs when you were cooking dinner and your knife fell, would you jump back and have it such that the toddler was under the knife? No. You would stop the procedure in your nervous system to protect. But in your nervous system, there is a written instruction that has said, jump back from that knife. Same thing. You see the soccer ball coming, and let's say you're holding your baby and you can't let your baby down to protect your head, and you want to, but you can't, and you get hit. There will be a movement in your spine and your upper neck muscles that wants to get away from that, but you couldn't. So a lot of these procedural memories that get written in our physiology, in our peripheral nervous system, attaches the muscles. When we can't fight, flee, protect, do a behavior, even shout, scream, say, I don't like that. No, I don't want to hug Uncle Harry. Come on, just give him a hug. It's yeah, don't do that. right? They will repress a part of them. And so what occurs is as we age or as we get older as kids, these things come out in behaviors. But when you understand how this works at this trauma level, at the nervous system level, you go, oh, that's that. Oh, that's why my back and hip flexor is sore. I wanted to pull my leg back, but I had to keep it static. I saw this a lot with people in car accidents where they're literally screwed because they want to slam on the brakes, but for whatever reason they can't. And I mean, I don't know if you've ever, I've thank God, knock on wood, I've not been in a car accident like that.
Me either.
Yeah, knock on the forest. I've worked with some people where I hear their story. It's like they want to turn and they want to brake or they want to accelerate, but if they do, they might hit someone else. So they have to suppress that impulse. And so in their movements of their arms is this movement that didn't get to happen. And then 3 years later, they're still going to physical therapy or massage to try to get this kink out of their shoulder. But it's in the nervous system. It's in that shock trauma that got stuck. I find that part is so fascinating because when you understand it, you start to see how many methodologies we do to try to ease our pain. But so much of it is at that procedural memory that I just talked about. So to keep going, I'll finish up this thought with the kids. Those are some examples. The other thing is, let's just say that you were a freaked out mom when you were holding, a little one in the first couple of years, and you loved, you connected. And I heard this story so much from my students. I did everything. I co-slept, I attachment parented, fed on demand with my boob, and kiddo still ended up anxious and all the things. Let's just say that occurred. That's where you doing your own work as the parent is essential. Mm-hmm. Because as you gain your regulation, they will feel it. And it isn't about what you say or, hey, honey, mama's going to do this. No, they don't need to know that. They will feel it. Just like when you meet someone who just has that regulation, you just feel better. Whereas when you walk into a room and someone's like kind of, on fire, mm-hmm. You start to feel it yourself. If you're not careful, in 2 minutes, you're like matched with that energy.
Yep.
And so think about all the times that mother would hold their baby, connect with their baby, even if she's loving the baby, but there's this like energy of franticness that's going to go in. So that's why I say always start with your own regulation and then it'll ripple out.
That makes so much sense. And we had a caregiver in the past and I loved her. She did so much. She was so helpful, but 100, just riddled with anxiety. And while that worked for getting a lot done in the house,
it does.
I didn't realize how serious it affected me and even my littles. And my husband would, for a long time was like, we just have to let her go and find someone else. It's nothing personal, but I don't like the energy she's bringing into the house. Yeah. And I was like, in newborn territory, I needed so much help. And I was like, we have to keep her. And I kind of chalked it off to not a big deal. Well, when she actually left and we, had no help for a while and it was just the family, I was like, whoa, the kids calmed down. Yeah. I calmed, everything kind of settled. And then I realized, I guess, how numb or avoidant I was to that. Cause I was trying to justify it. I needed the help or she's good in these other ways. And I'm no, the energy that someone brings into something so sacred as your home is really important. And you should really treat that as a privilege as to who's allowed to spend, even enter, but spend serious time in that space and with your children. Because I feel like, especially with them, they're still trying to develop and figure out who they are. And so much, they take on so much of other people's stuff. So with that, I was watching one of your videos and you were talking, I loved that you brought up Edgar Cayce because he's my father-in-law's favorite person. He's wow. Edgar Cayce's #1 fan.
Oh, wow.
He even went to the museum and everything.
Oh, yeah.
And,
such a such a great spot on Virginia Beach. Oh my
Yeah,
God.
we have to go. I have to take him again because he would just eat it up. But you brought up the difference between personality and individuality. And I thought
Yeah.
that was so fascinating. So the one, to my understanding, is the conditioned you and how you feel you're supposed to show up in a way that you're going to get accepted by the tribe. And then that would be personality.
Yeah.
And then the individuality is your soul's essence, your purpose,
Yes.
something more divine and larger and kind of maybe karmic in a sense as to why
Mhm.
you're here. Now, we are both, and we have so much of culture and parenting and conditioning. And if you get into epigenetic, like the personality is so deep and dense.
Yeah.
If you are in this place where you're trying to identify what is my essence versus what is my conditioning, how do you have clarity as to which bucket that goes into? Because what I see in so many ways, it could be people that are talking about what kind of relationship they want to be in, and maybe they're super promiscuous and they're like, this is what I want, and like you can kind of see the self-sabotaging behavior in a way. But from afar, it's like everything's 20/20 hindsight. You're like, well, actually, this is kind of maybe why you're making these decisions, but you can't tell the person that. Another one was you made a post with your race car driving, and I thought that was so great because you can do the same thing, but the energy going into it makes all the difference. So I guess long-winded question is, how do you distinguish between that personality and the individuality?
Yeah. So the quick answer is, from my experience, it is very difficult to find your individuality. One might say the authentic, true essence of your soul and how it expresses in behavior now. It's very hard to find that if you are swimming in your old survival stress and in your old traumas and in your old attachment wounds that aren't even old because they're with you right now. I don't know how to say it any simpler. It is very difficult to find that true, authentic self that can sustain when you still have quite a bit of baggage, if you will, monkeys on your back, many monkeys on your back and on your head, around this past stuff. What I've seen, Candace, is when people start to get their regulation on board, and I don't mean manage, there's a difference, and maybe we can talk about that too soon, is when they're really in regulation, they start to get these little hints and glimmers and sparks. And the way you know it's happening is someone will say, I feel really weird. I don't really feel like myself. That's one of the dead giveaways, because your self is your personality. And they'll be like, yeah, I just want to just stare at that tree and go like touch the moss. And all of a sudden I'm going to sing to it, but I don't know why. And it might be like, oh, well, maybe that's something you wanted to do when you were a kid and you didn't get to. And now that stuff is bubbling up. So that is how I think, from what I've seen, you start to unravel and find, because it's there. It's there. It's just, and this is what Casey was so great with. I was just reading him he's like my Bible. I read his books every night before I go to bed. And it's like, you are not going to find your true self if you are stuck in personality. Now, we need our personality to survive in our current world. Great example. I was traveling in the Philippines and Hong Kong with my husband. My mother's from the Philippines. My dad isn't. I'm half. So we're in the Philippines. Everyone's just crossing the road everywhere. It's just chaos, right? But it's organized chaos. And even in the big city, people are crossing massive highways. It's not a problem. So we get to Hong Kong. So we're in the Philippines for 3 weeks. We get to Hong Kong. I don't know if you've been to Hong Kong, but it's very busy. It's very ordered. It's Hong Kong. And we're waiting at this island to cross. And it's red, but there's clearly no cars coming. And my husband, who's never experienced these differences, starts to cross. And I fucking grab him. I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, well, you always jaywalk. I'm like, is anybody here jaywalking? He's like, no. said, we don't jaywalk in Hong Kong. And he was so confused. And that comes back to safety. Like, it is not conducive to my safety in this foreign city to go with how I want to in my individuality, where I would cross the street if I was in Vancouver or in New York City or wherever. Like, you just wouldn't even do that in Switzerland, because it's like, you just don't do that. So that's one example of where sometimes you have to bring in the radar of, we don't do that here. Mm. And that's where there's this fine balance, I think, between manners and what's proper and societal decencies. But then if you can't let go of that when you're in the comfort of your own home, like I mentioned, walking around naked, if you can't let out gas and burp without having to say, excuse me, in your own home, something's not right. And we teach kids to do that, right? As opposed to, this is a normal biological process. I'm not going to make a joke about it, because God only knows guys love to joke about gas, and girls do too. But it's like, can it just happen without shame, pure biology, and then back to the authenticity, individuality. Another thing that people will say, Candace, when people start to get more regulated, real regulation, is they'll say, I feel human. They'll say that. I actually feel human. And then they go, I don't know what that means, but I actually feel like I'm human. And if we really think about what a human is, without the survival and without the trauma, we are the most magnificent machine, biological being, God only knows what. We've got so much stuff in us, higher brain, we still don't understand where it came from, really. And then we have this mammalian physiology that is still being driven by survival mechanisms that we still haven't perfected, and we're messing up because of how we child rear, right? And so all these things kind of go into one big kind of pot. And so how can one be in one's individuality, knowing that when they go into their car to go, like I said in that post, I love driving fast, but I'm not going to do that down the side streets where kids are playing. Of course, we know some people do that. They're not thinking about the other people. And so it's like this really interesting balance to find that expression of who you really are, but still fit into society and play by the rules. It's an art form, to be honest. And it's difficult, because if we were really living from our true biological nature and individuality, we would just, things would be a bit more chaotic, I think, actually, than they are right now. Just different. Does that make sense?
No, it totally does. It's, I feel like it's so funny because it's so much easier to assess someone else's stuff than your own, right? It's that old adage that I don't know who discovered water, but it wasn't a fish. So like, there was this influencer, and she is married to a very type A, high achieving man, and they kind of built this company up to tons of money, and they're super, super successful. And people kind of keep asking when she's going to have kids. And she gets, I think for me, this is my perspective, when you watch it and someone's like still very emotional about the thing, that tells me like it's not healed, or it's not necessarily the real reason you're doing something, right? It's more of a protection mechanism. So she starts off by saying it's not in her path. That's not what she wants. And of course, I don't think being a parent is for everyone. It certainly shouldn't be. Some people should not be parents. And not everyone needs to want that, right? Like I fully support you if you don't want to. But she then goes on to talk about her really abusive relationship with her mother and how awful that was and how awful it still is. And then for the whole comment section, it's like glaringly obvious. It's like, man, that is a wound that needs to be healed, because it's actually making decisions for you. Yeah. Now, if you do the healing and on the other side, you still don't want to be a parent, beautiful, right? Now you're actually consciously making that decision. But right now, it seems to me that it's a very unconscious thing that's driving you. So for someone on the outside, that's personality all day. That's not individuality. Yeah. And I think that there's examples like that with a lot of people, because you see birth rate decline globally. And that's kind of a scary thing at scale, because if you can't support the infrastructure, what happens to the species and culture as we know it? We don't know, but it's probably not good.
It's happening.
And I would venture a lot of people that have that hesitation or like that deep fear or resistance to becoming a parent, it's personality, it's not individuality. So it's their narrative about, they're going to lose themselves if they have a kid, or they're not going to be able to live this very exciting materialistic life if they have kids. And I'm like, our kids have traveled everywhere, and we've you know what I mean? And we have such an adventure with them. And I would say if you're looking at it as a loss or a fear, that's probably something else that needs to be unpacked, and then just make that choice consciously.
I've worked with many women who in their older are in their older years, and they'll just say point blank, this is why I never had kids, because I knew, and they're probably right, they didn't have the ability to regulate and get real healing on board in their childbearing years, because these are women in their 80s, 70s, 60s. And there's a deep grief and loss for those women, because they know that they didn't have the equipment, not the equipment, sorry, wrong words. They had the equipment. They didn't, there's another thing
software
there.
Maybe.
Yeah, the thing is when you have dysregulation deep in, it affects the entire physiology, and your reproductive physiology is part of that. I have no doubt that there are, and I'm sure it hasn't been researched, that many of the troubles around fertility, yes, there's food, there's circadian biology, all the chemicals, but it's the regulation. And I now have 3 of my female students, 2 of which had tried to get pregnant before, like 5 years ago, and they couldn't, and poof, they're pregnant now that they have regulation. They've done nothing fancy. And we're meant to have babies as females. We wouldn't be here if that wasn't the case. And I think that, for the younger generation, the hope I see is I'm seeing my students in their 30s who are dedicated to working on their nervous systems before they even look for a mate. Mm-hmm. And that will make the process so much easier, because it is the other pain I see with couples who have kids is when there's a difference in opinion on how to raise the child. Holy man, that is so tough when I see that, because I used to work with kids, and I couldn't do it anymore, because there's just this tug of war between the parents. Typically it was the mother who wanted the healing, and that, not always, and the father just didn't want to have anything to do with it. Mm-hmm. And not to say it's a lost cause, but that family unit is so important. So that's the other thing for all those here who haven't yet had babies. It's very important to have a person in your life, if you go down that path, where you are in agreement. Because it sounded like you and your husband sound like you guys are in agreement when you mentioned that person that was helping. Mm-hmm. Imagine if that was your husband. Mm-hmm. Like, what do you...
I don't know how that's not a conversation that's like, it always shocks me when you have people that have such a difference of opinion on values, principles, how we're going to child rear. Like, that needs to be ironed out before baby.
And I think it doesn't happen because, and this is a big blanket statement, but generally speaking, most humans have no idea how their biology works and how humans work. And it's case in point with how we have taught parents to let their babies cry themselves to sleep. How mm-hmm. we've taught everyone a baby should be in a crib. Baby can't lie on the floor flat. Baby can't, be outside in the rain. All these things that mm-hmm. we've just been taught. Like there is such a missing infrastructure, encyclopedia, knowledge, wisdom of that. But animals in the wild, they know what to do. Mm-hmm. Right? It's not a mother bear doesn't think, oh, I don't think I'm going to get knocked up this season. Right?
Yeah.
They mate with the dude, and they have babies in the spring. It's not mm-hmm. even a thought. And so this is where I said our higher brains have really made this so interesting, and read that word difficult for us, because we can choose, right, whether we do or don't. But then we have this physiology that we don't understand. I did a video a while ago, Candace. I'll have to send it to you. It's a longer one. Have you ever read Michael Crichton's book Travels?
Mm-mm.
He was the founder of Jurassic Park.
Okay.
And he did the TV show ER back in the George Clooney days. And he made that because he was a physician. Like he went to medical school in Boston in the 50s. And there's a portion in that book called the Boston Lying-In Hospital. And it doesn't exist anymore. I looked it up, but it's where people went to birth babies in Boston in the 50s and probably the 40s. And that chapter is scary because it talks about how he, as a resident, he saw 3 different wards, and the different wards depended on your class. So if you had the money, you were sedated and knocked out for your childbirth. There was another class, I can't remember exactly what it was, but then the lower class were all the teenagers who had gotten pregnant out of wedlock. And of course, it's Boston, Catholicism. And they would literally, these girls would be dropped off by their parents and not allowed to go home until their baby was born. But what was so interesting is that he preferred hanging out with the teenagers because they were given no drugs at all, and they just had to be with natural childbirth. Granted, it was in a hospital, but they weren't drugged on anything, and they had so much to teach them because they found kind of their biology. Mm-hmm. And they're like, I just have to do this, and it hurts, but I want to do this. I want to get this kiddo out. And of course, they couldn't keep their child. Don't know what happened to them, probably went somewhere. But it's such an interesting chapter because it shows like that would never happen in the wild. And so I often will say, statement-wise, there is a right way to birth and raise babies. We are just so afraid to say this is the way. And it was done before all the medicalization and all the parenting books and all these sorts of things. I also think the other reason why it's so difficult, this goes back to regulation. If you can't be with your body and feel your body, it's going to be that much more difficult to do this, right? If you have shame having a bowel movement, or you have shame around your menstrual cycle because that was taught to you, maybe from a very young age, that has to get fixed, not the best word, that has to get healed. So that you can be in connection with your uterus and your womb and the feelings, because it gives us clues like, oh, I think I need a little bit more of this today. I need more protein. I need more minerals. But if you can't feel that, you're not going to give the system what it needs. And then we wonder why there's so many problems with defects, birth problems, low birth weight, all these things, trouble having a natural childbirth. I could go on and on that one. So
yeah, and looking to nature, because I guess one of the things I always wrestle with and struggle with when it comes to like a lot of these healing containers is it seems like there's a lot of enabling of this idea that we're so fragile and like we're not resilient. So it's almost like everything is validated all of the time. And I see the word trauma thrown around so casually. And just like anything else, if you take the meaning away from the word, you're actually hurting the people that need that definition, right? Because now it carries no weight. Yeah. So in the wild, you see like gazelles will shake, or you'll see the lion cubs will actually reenact almost getting attacked, and then kind of like the play that we were talking about with the kids. So they have these natural ways to work out the trauma so that they can do a nervous system reset. And I had heard about that, and then when I've only had a couple of psychedelic experiences, but both times were very like somatic, and I had so much shaking. So I was automatically like, I did the healing. I'm healed because I shook like a gazelle. Yeah. And I realized that's not the case. Like definitely I got a lot of insight, but you and I were speaking shortly after my more recent one, and I was so dysregulated. I was so short, so snappy. I was crying all of the time, like overwhelmed all of the time. And I would just be like looking at my husband and I'm like, I don't know what to do right now. Like I feel like my reality has just shifted so drastically that it's truly overwhelming. And
Yeah.
I got to a place where it's mostly worked out. Like I'll still get some tension right here that's new and I've never had before.
Mm-hmm.
So I would love your perspective on the difference between actually healing versus these things that are maintaining.
Yeah. Loaded question, my
I
dear.
know.
Yeah. So I always go back to the baby. I'll get back to this. So when you have your baby, you had your baby, when anyone has their baby, you don't just connect with them once in a week to form what we would call self-regulation. So I'll throw out a bit of science just so that we clarify this. So when we're born, we have full term and we're healthy. We have some self-regulatory capacities on board. We can pee, we can poop, we can eat. We have a fear response. They sadly have to test all those reflexes in a normal hospital, but that stuff is there. But what isn't there is the ability to self-soothe. And that builds over time. That builds through co-regulation with the primary caregiver. That builds through being held when you cry. Why do you cry as a baby? You are in physiological distress. You're not emotionally distressed. That isn't online yet. There is something in the tummy. There's a temperature problem. There is a feeling of a fear. Back to your helper in your house. I'm sure that the kids felt that tension and they weren't sure what it was. So physiological distress, crying, mama picks up one, soothes, you connect, it's okay. They see that it's okay. You feel that connection. They come out of activation. And I'm using my hand to depict like the sympathetic response of the nervous system, fight, flight. There's connection. We come down through, it would be social engagement, which is part of the parasympathetic nervous system, part of our vagus nerve, goes directly to the heart. And it calms the pacemaker of the heart. I'm happy, I'm fine, okay, good, boom, 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 boom. Oh, now I'm hungry, now I'm in rest digest, I want to feed. So that happens, I couldn't count, but millions of times, thousands of times in the course of an infant's life. And then you have toddlerhood, fall, scrape the knee. It's a whole other set of things that you have to do to teach them. And then you bring in right from wrong, healthy shame versus toxic shame, all these things. So to build full regulation of a human, it's this ongoing, forever process that is exhausting for the parent, right? It takes a lot of energy and discipline and consistency. So let's say that hasn't happened. It happened enough, just enough, such that a person is in life and can be here, right? There's a lot of people that didn't have it perfect and they're still great members of society contributing all these things. But let's say you're in your 30s, 40s, and you're like, I need to heal those wounds. The thought that we can have one experience, albeit no doubt a wonderful experience with a leader, a shaman, a doctor, a therapist who is well-meaning, and clear out all core wounds is ridiculous. Mm-hmm. Because it takes years and months and weeks and days to build up that individuality, that robustness, that self-regulation. Is there something occurring when you're shaking? 100%. I have no doubt that there was something that got released. A release is very different than healing. So again, I like how you said words get thrown around. A release doesn't necessarily mean you've healed your nervous system. It's just a release. Mm. And you mentioned the tightness in the chest. I can only speculate, but I've had some of that myself the last 5 years, and it shifts for me because I have had so many injuries to my arms and legs and brain through all my sport. When I feel that, I know it's the fascia that is either unsticking or it's trying to bear down to keep me in protection because I'm lifting out of it. It just happened to me last week. I had some shoulder work done and I was emotional the next day. But it came with a headache that was out of this world. And the headache was trying to reassert the armor that this guy broke apart. But if I didn't know that, I would have just popped, 3 Advil and done whatever and numbed myself. But I'm like, no, this isn't that. I stood with it. I hung out with it. I felt the pain. And from that was this intense emotional loss. And I was standing in the kitchen and I just started breaking down crying, and my husband totally gets this. So he just wasn't trying to fix it. This is the other thing. When you don't have a partner that understands this, they might be like, oh my God, what's wrong, babe? Like, what can I do? And like, he just like kept cooking his breakfast as I literally had a meltdown like a 3-year-old in our kitchen. What happened after that? The headache lifted. So back to the thing about what's happening in these spaces when there's a shaking, we would call that a neurostimulus. So there's a stimulus happening to the system. You took something, it shifted things around. It doesn't mean it's bad, but the question is what occurs after to integrate it? And that's the part where it's hard to know. And so now the question is, okay, how can you work with your body without the mind-altering stimulants, chemicals, plant medicines, to work sober, to go into these spots and find them and feel them? Now, some people, it's like, oh my God, that might take forever because I can't feel in here. It's like, well, then if I'm really kind of testy about it, it's like, well, if you can't feel, then one shouldn't be doing those substances. Mm-hmm. Because that's where this comes back to what we said at the beginning of our talk. If we can't ascertain and categorize with intelligence and regulation what's coming up, that's where and you had some of that, you were dysregulated afterwards. You were more dysregulated. Doesn't necessarily mean you were traumatized. It's just it hit you a little bit out of your window of tolerance. Mm-hmm. And now it's like, okay, there's something there. You might not know what it is, or maybe you do know what it is. And it's a question of moving forward to work with that with more, we could say titration is the word, slower little bits. Mm-hmm. Did that answer your question?
Kind of, I guess.
If not,
let
me know.
Yeah, I guess it's like, it sounds like the way to do the healing, it's a process. And I think a lot of people want to avoid that because it seems so tedious, and it can probably be really frustrating, especially if you are numb, or it's really hard to even communicate at all with your body or write your soma in any way. So you want these things that are maybe like a sledgehammer, because then they're so obvious, right? Like you don't take a big dose of psilocybin or MDMA and you're like, it's not working. You know what I mean? Like it's going to make you very aware.
That happens. They'll take something and they don't feel anything.
That's true, actually. I should take that back. Yeah.
So it's like, well, what's going on there? My sense with that, because I used to be quite immune to a lot of stuff in my 20s. I think it's a sign of real deep functional freeze. That's just my speculation. Because back in the day, I could drink and do all the things. And now it's like, I feel it if I've had a glass of wine at night. So I do think that for many of us, we don't realize how armored we are in our nervous system physiology. And then that connects to our internal organs and how we process stuff. So someone might say, well, isn't that good if someone takes a poison and it doesn't affect them? It's like, poison might be different, but it comes back to the core organ systems. So this might answer the question a bit better. And the reason why this is difficult, Candace, is because it's kind of uncharted territory. Like my main teacher, the work of somatic experiencing, which was founded by Peter Levine, we think that's been around for a long time, but it hasn't. It's only been about 40 years, and really only 10 in the way that it's really being mastered a little bit more, which is nothing if we compare it to, say, medical surgery, right? That's been around for thousands of years. So when we are working with our physiology and our trauma responses, it's going to impact our organ systems. So trauma gets stuck in that autonomic nervous system wiring, but it isn't just impacting the nervous system, it's impacting every single organ system. circulation, immune, gut, reproductive, like I said, the brain, social engagement, thinking, sleep-wake cycles, I mean, everything. And so we have to look at working with these traumas and doing the healing with all the systems. And so you usually know when someone's on the right track when there's a little bit of improvement in each one. And I liken it to, like, I always see this image of like chess pieces or checker pieces on a table. You don't want to just move one ahead. You want to move them all a little bit and have them stabilize. And then you do another piece of emotional work, trauma work, nervous system regulation work, and you want them all to come together. Now, what happens is when we do too much, and this sounds like what happened with you, is we push one too far forward and the other ones kind of fall back. And so sometimes people will do a really good piece of, say, emotional work, and it feels good, and they cry and they get it out, but then their gut is off for like a month. Or their sleep is off for a week or two, or they get sick.
My mind's blown right now because I didn't even realize this until you just said that. So I've been having like major stomach issues out of nowhere, and my diet hasn't changed. If anything, it's gotten better. So I'm like, this doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And my low back has been like, I'm not exaggerating when I say a 10. And I have thrown everything at the wall. I've done chiro, dry needling, PT. I'm working out with a trainer that's very good at what he does, and nothing is doing a bit of relief. And I'm like, so it's obviously not physical. Like I know, but how do you fix? I'm like, how do I fix it if I'm doing all these physical things, and some of them are medicine, and some of them are more Eastern, and nothing's letting up?
Well, it is physical, but the root of why, and I don't know your history, so we could talk about this after, or we can talk about it now. But it's like, it's physical. Like this is where. Like there's some forms of healing where it's like, oh, it's all in the conflict, or it's all in the energetic, or it's all in, we're in Lionsgate now, right? It's all in the stars. It's like, well, actually, I believe you. It's physical. Something is in pain, or something is seized. It almost sounds like. Am I correct there? There's like
when I get up from a chair, I look like an 80-year-old woman. And then it takes So the seizing means that there is some form of physiological freeze verging on shutdown, probably, again, I'm speculating, that got locked in because you were having this good cathartic release, but the rest of you didn't know what to do with it. So it doesn't know what to do with it. So it's like, ugh. So it'd be interesting if we could go back, in time and like look at what was going on in your sacrum and in your hip joints when you were having those releases, because it's possible, your we would call them our distal limbs were moving, but the core physiology, the central part of that skeletal muscular fascial system, was just bearing down, going, I don't like this. Even though you might not consciously thought that, somewhere in the unconscious is like, this is a bit too much, I need to stop. And this is where, when we have some of these medicines that are a little more like it's like with LSD, like you're on that trip for 8-10 hours or more, like you cannot make it stop. So that's, I mean, I'm sorry that occurred, but that's probably what has happened. And the digestion is so sensitive to this stuff because it has got so many nerve endings. It is technically our first brain. That's how babies sense, is through their gut. And that vagus nerve that everybody's talking about and kind of abusing, it part of it goes to the gut. And when we are thrown into a situation of intense activation without containment of that activation, which it sounds like happened with you, that vagus nerve can go into shock, and it can bear down and be like, I am going to stop functioning because there is a survival stress that just passed through and I'm not sure what to do with it.
So that's where, someone might be going, well, what do you do with that? That's where then you want to kind of build back the basics, which aren't always very glamorous, but I always go back to the baby. Connection, attunement, biological needs, following your impulse, lots of rest. There's a reason why babies sleep so much, because they're forming new pathways and they need lots of pauses. And what frustrates people who are goers, which I sense you were that person and are trying to get out of it.
Guilty, yeah.
Is the mind is like, oh my God, if I actually slow down, I may never speed back up. And I'm that person, so I get it, right? I totally get it. But the body, back to those checker pieces on the table, if one's been thrown off, you got to kind of go back to the basics and be like, okay, let's not worry about any fancy healing. I think that's the other thing is we throw that word out, healing, but most people don't really know what that means. In many ways, for me, healing means that your system is regenerating and repairing without you having to do anything. And the world of mind, body, health, alternative medicine, it's like we're always trying to do something to make our system heal faster, which I get. There's some elements to that I practice too, some biohacks, but core regulation means that you don't need any of these things. Granted, you want clean air, water, all those things, food, movement, good relationships. But if those are all in order and one is still needing all of these things to feel better, that is not regulation. That's management of dysregulation.
No, that makes so much sense to me. And earlier in the conversation, you mentioned cold plunging. We have a cold plunge as well. I've heard mixed things when it comes to that. And that like it could be adding extra stress and putting you more into fight or flight. Is there a way to do it safely to where it's beneficial? And is there a way to overdo it to where you are putting yourself or your nervous system into fight, flight, or freeze?
It comes back to that example I gave to you about the military. And it depends on where your system is. So,
okay.
I mean, physiologically, when you go into cold water, and it's cold water to the kind of cold water that if you stayed in there, you'd get hypothermic, which is usually what the cold plunges are at. What happens is the system goes into something called a dive reflex, and things start to slow down. And therapeutically, that can be good. The blood is being pushed to the organs. It's coming away from the limbs. This is why people will be like, I don't feel my feet anymore or hands. The trouble is that you don't want to go into such sensory anesthesia that when you get out, it doesn't perfuse quickly. So if someone has deep nervous system dysregulation, what you often hear typically when it's more on the spectrum of collapse and shutdown, I can't get warm, I'm always cold, like that kind of thing. It's very thyroid based often. You don't want to do much of that because it is a stress to the system versus a cooler bath followed by some warm, cool, warm, right? So the world of hydrotherapy is wonderful, but what's happened with the cold thing, and I think it's probably, due to just the trends and Wim Hof and Rogan, totally appreciate Rogan, but, he's built differently, and
for sure. Yeah.
and he's also obviously a male. They don't have they have a 24-hour hormonal cycle versus us. It's 28-ish days. So it's different, right? And he's healthy, but I also sense that there's a little bit of shutdown in there, and that's fine. So he can persist in that for, in my opinion, way too long. So it depends on the person. It depends on their energy levels, and it depends on whether or not they're feeling their bodies. Like I was watching something, I get sent way too many things and I shouldn't look at them. But it was a woman who had some form of really severe chronic illness. I don't know what it was. She looked really sick and emaciated, and she was on the 30-day cold plunge challenge. And I'm like, girl, you should not be in that cold water. You should be in a salt bath that's warm. drinking like coconut oil afterwards. Like, it was just so clear she had no substance to her. She was super undernourished, underweight, but she was doing it because she had heard, I think, that cold plunges can heal autoimmune conditions. Like, well, it's not that simple. And then in the comment, she was speaking about how her gut's been thrown off. I'm like, well, that's because you keep putting your system into survival stress. And it can't bounce out of that because it's already in survival stress.
Mm-hmm.
Edgar Cayce has so much information actually on hydrotherapy. That's some of the best hydrotherapy advice I've read. He would call them sitz baths. I don't know if you came across that in his work, but
no,
where you just fill up a bathtub, and the key is that it just covers your pelvic organs.
Okay.
And he says, start with 30 seconds. And then he says, get to the point where you can be in that bath for, I think it's 3 minutes. But he also says, keep your feet out of it, which is tricky. I've tried. But it's because the moment the feet are in there, it drops the temperature a lot more. Like, if someone is overheating, the best way to cool them down is put their feet in cold water and hands. So he had an interesting perspective with hydrotherapy. It wasn't just cold, it was also balancing it with heat, balancing it with steam, sauna, different salts. But the thing at the end of the day, if a person can't feel their body and they're just doing it prescriptively, it isn't, in my opinion, useful, because you don't know what's going on. And you can pass out if your system can't handle it. And the last thing you want to do or be is in a body of water passing out. And I have heard of instances where people have drowned doing breath work in cold water and the system just shuts off. That is an autonomic nervous system response. So cold is great. The key is, why are you using it? Are you feeling better after? Or are you not? You have to be able to warm up again. If your system remains cold for the rest of the day or the rest of the night after doing it, then the system can't regenerate its heat again. And that, again, is a sign of the system being in dysregulation. Just like if you have a hot bath, you want to get out of that bath and sweat, right? And then that cools you off. It goes both ways. Does that answer your question?
Yes. So I would imagine it's probably the same too if you're doing infrared sauna or something that's at more extreme temperatures, is just to keep an eye. And I guess that's the key, is that the prescription is going to be different for everybody. So you just have to clock into whether you're feeling better or more regenerated at the end, or more depleted.
If you're feeling more depleted and less energized, and then it's not helping, right? I think the only instance, not only, but one of the instances is sometimes when you've done something that's hydrotherapy based, or say bodywork based, or even some kind of therapy, you might feel almost like you're getting sick. It's almost like a feeling of flu. That is, from what I've experienced and heard, isn't actually that. It's the system recalibrating, and it's a detox, essentially. And I even know detoxing is getting controversial now, but it is something has moved in your system. Often it comes with a feeling of nausea. What is nausea? It's in the gut. So that shows something is shifting at that core peripheral nervous system level. The key is, you don't want to be in that nauseous state, feeling off for weeks and weeks. That's another sign that you've gone too far.
Yeah, that'll happen to me sometimes if I stay in the sauna too long, but it usually is gone within like 20 minutes or so. Or if my bath is way too hot, it'll take me a little, like 20, 30 minutes to calibrate. Recalibrate.
And I think, play with it, like try even going a little less and seeing if the bounce back can happen within minutes. But this is the other key, Candace. What often occurs is people go into these hydrotherapy situations, or the cold bath, but they don't pause to feel and process what they're sensing. And so often, again, this comes back to that culture of, the bros egging each other on to get into the bath. If you're getting in that bath and you're like this, hopefully this isn't too loud, and you're like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, it's so cold, so cold, get me out of it. And you're like this?
Mm-hmm.
No. Like what that is doing is that it's showing that is too cold for you. Sorry. And you're putting more survival sympathetic energy into your system. Yes, you're going to go and it's going to be cold, but if you can't, and again, this is where it's contextual. You also want to breathe, but you won't want to breathe into dissociation. So there's like this, you can actually have a lot of fun with these therapeutic methodologies, but you got to understand what's happening in your nervous system. And I mean, the saddest thing I saw the other day was a guy was getting his kid, he was maybe no more older than 6, into this cold plunge. And the kid was like freaking out. And the dad's like, come on, be a man, just keep breathing. And he's just like, he's shivering. I'm like, oh my God, what are you doing? And so that, like, it's gotten a little too far, in my opinion, because it is not a panacea. It's not a one size fits all, fix it. It can be very useful, but it's the context and understanding what's happening in your physiology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's probably not the best move if you're having to force your kid into it. So my grandma's Japanese, and like she, when we were little, and we would stay with her for weekends or whatever while our parents were away, she would just kind of do her own thing. And it's, grandmothers, they have their way of, this is how you raise kids, especially if like mom and dad are gone.
Yes.
So we would do bath time or shower time, and she would always end us on cold. She would like hold us under the shower, and it would be so freezing. And I'm like, well, why are you doing this to me? And she's like, oh, it's so good for you. And I'd get out. So it's not as intense as a cold plunge, but for her, it was just like what you did. It's just what you did kept you healthy. So, I mean, my introduction was really young, but it's definitely different than, a 30-degree cold plunge.
Yeah, that's a little more innocent than a cold plunge of 30, 35 degrees.
Yeah.
Oh, but
yeah, she's one of my favorite people.
That's great.
I could literally spend weeks with you. You were just so fascinating to me, but I don't want to take up your entire afternoon. I would love to have you back on in the future if you ever feel pulled, because I have so many notes, and I really think that we could get into a lot of really fun topics. But before we wrap, do you want to tell the listeners where they can follow you, how they can support you? Plug away.
Yeah, it's pretty easy. It's my name, just Irene Lyon, no S.com. Everything is there. And there's a lot there. I've got a YouTube channel that's been going for quite some time now, obviously Instagram, all the socials. But the real work is in my open free resources and my courses and classes. So my background, just so people know, is in science. It's in biology and physiology and health science. And then I got into mind-body through injuries. And then got into the trauma work because I saw in my client work that I was missing something. So that's kind of how I went down this path. So my background in the training I have combines in all the courses. So it isn't just, I'm not just teaching, say, somatic experiencing my classes. I'm not just teaching mind, body, movement. It is an amalgamation of 3 main methodologies into one, and that's what I teach my folks. I don't do private practice anymore. I am in the midst of starting to train others to do my work. I call it scientuitive practice, and that's me. Yeah, 2 courses. There's one course called Smart Body, Smart Mind, which is a 12-week curriculum, and that is the one that gets into all the deeper elements of working with the stress physiology, the organs, the vagus nerve, aggression, anger, toxic shame, which we didn't even get into. That's a whole other topic. So that, and then, just so many videos. So a lot of people will go down that rabbit hole and get stuck watching them. So that's one way to start.
Amazing. Yeah. And I will link that below for everybody to find. And again, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And that's it for this week's episode of Chatting with Candace. Before you go, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. It helps with the algorithm, helps the channel grow, helps people discover us. And if you know anyone that would like this episode, please share it with them. And I'll see you next week. Bye, everybody.